In this video, we will be analyzing a chess game played by Capablanca, and I think that this is a very interesting game for us to learn from, as there were a lot of tactical opportunities in this game, and it is really a good lesson in how to attack the opponent when they have castled on the opposite side. So Capablanca was playing this with the white pieces and decided to play e4, and the opening itself here is actually very basic. We have e4, e5, knight to f3, attacking the pawn, knight to c6, defending the pawn, and then Capablanca plays bishop to b5, the Ruy Lopez opening, attacking the knight, and then white immediately plays a6. And for those of you that are not familiar with this, it might look like white can just capture here and then win a pawn. But it's actually not such a good move for white to do this, because black would be playing queen e7, the knight's under attack, this pawn is going to drop, and it's a big theoretical mess that I don't really want to get into. That's not the point of this video. So Capablanca moves back the bishop, black plays knight to f6, attacking the central pawn, but there is a similar dynamic going on there, where this is a pawn that we don't really need to defend, because if black were to take it, we would have similar plans of playing queen e2 and then eventually winning back material. So Capablanca just ignores what's going on there with the e4 pawn, and he plays pawn to d4. And as I said before, the opening is not really the most crucial part of this game. Black plays b5, Capablanca moves the bishop back, and then eventually we end up having some trades. Black does end up taking the pawn, white ends up taking the other pawn, trade, and then we get into this position. And this is really the position where I wanted to start explaining from, because this is the interesting one. So what has actually happened so far? Well, first of all, white is the only one with a pawn in the center. And white also has some attacking options against that enemy king, potentially. Bishop is eyeing down that pawn. Maybe a queen h5 or a queen f3 could also work to attack this pawn. So white has a bit of central presence and also some attacking options against the king side. On the other hand, black has these two pieces, and both of them are also looking towards the white king side. So there is really an interesting dynamic going on here, where both players are starting to set up their pieces to attack the other one. Capablanca decides to castle anyways, and by castling, put the king to safety, but we will need to be careful, as I have said, there are some lines of attack already opening towards the king side. And black just adds another piece. So in this game, black's main strategy was to focus on piece development, and that has really paid off so far, because black has these three very active pieces all looking towards the king side, and Capablanca, although he already managed to castle, he basically only has one piece on the board and then one pawn in the center. So when you have a position like this, where your opponent has developed more pieces, they basically have what is called a lead in development. It is very dangerous for white to make useless or slow moves. What I would mean with that would be like making a random pawn move here or there, or trying to go pawn grabbing. That wouldn't really be great, because the thing that white really needs to do is catch up in development as quickly as possible, which means also put more pieces onto the board, put them into play. And trading would also be good for white here, since with every trade we are somewhat neutralizing that opening advantage that black has. So a very good move to consider here would be, for example, knight to d2, just trying to use one of our, well, undeveloped pieces so far to see if we can get rid of that central knight. Instead, Capablanca decided to play a queen g4, which at first sight, there is a lot of theory and a lot of like planning behind his move, because it's actually setting up a trap. So the move is interesting, but the move doesn't really solve the problem, which is that white is severely underdeveloped, and putting the queen on the board this early might not have been the best strategy. This move, however, sets up a trap, and the trap is that it attacks the g7 pawn. So white is threatening to win this pawn, and if black thinks I'm just going to castle to protect my pawn, then black would be losing because of the move bishop to h6. And this is a very common trap that you can set up. I think the best way to set this up is always to move the queen first, attack the pawn, tempt the opponent into castling, and then we play this. And this is good because this is a checkmate threat, checkmate in one. And to solve it, basically black would need to move the pawn and they would need to lose the rook. So that is really the plan behind this move that Capablanca played. However, black found a really, really good response in this position, which is that black realized that they actually don't need to defend that pawn. If they don't plan on castling short, that is. So black plays the move queen to e7, which is a genius move. This move is basically telling Capablanca, look, if you want to go pawn grabbing, you can, for sure. I don't have a problem with that, because white will eventually have a losing position if we go grab that pawn. Why is that? Well, it's as we have talked about. Black now has 4 developed pieces. White only has 2, so it's still not time for us to go pawn grabbing. We would be in trouble. So Capablanca didn't capture the pawn, but I just wanted to show you what would have happened if we did capture the pawn. So let's say we captured the pawn. Well, the rook is under attack, but the simple fix there is for black to just castle. And after black has castled, we cannot really take this rook. This is basically already game over. Well, why is that? I'm just going to make a move for white, just to showcase. For example, white tries to catch up in development, but we are already too late because we went pawn grabbing. And black would set up something like this, which is that they would attack the queen. The queen doesn't have that many squares, and after the queen moves, black would have a windmill tactic, which is that they have a check versus the king, and basically this rook can just go and pick up everything, or the rook can also go back so that the bishop delivers a check in an attempt to eventually go for a checkmate, which there will be an unstoppable checkmate from this point. So basically, black is really playing incredibly smart. They are using their lead in development to keep developing pieces, hope that Capablanca would make the mistake of starting to grab pawns, which would lose time. So this is a really crucial position, and it's very easy to misplay this, which is why I think this is a very interesting game to study. Because the only way for white to stay in the game is to develop pieces as soon as possible and just trade if we can. That's okay. So Capablanca decides to play knight c3, which it looks like an ugly move. I mean, black takes, we take, and we have double isolated pawns. That's not really what we want. Like, strategically speaking, this is not what we want. But strategy and chess always come second. Tactics always come first. And we have a strategic long-term problem with these doubled pawns, for sure. We don't want to just go into an endgame or something here. We would be worse with that pawn structure. But at least we got rid of one of their active pieces. And if we are quick enough with our moves, then we can still try to develop. By the way, this entire time, this pawn was hanging here as well, but black also shouldn't go pawn grabbing. Black should just keep up with the development and try to keep a lead on white. So if you find yourself in a position like this, it's really development of pieces that should be your main strategy. Rook e1 as Capablanca played. And black immediately starts the attack because in the end, they do have 2 very well-placed bishops and a queen that can all go over to the king side. So the plan for black is now to start a pawn storm, maybe to see if they could get rid of one of these 3 pawns, because if they can, that would be great, because then the rooks can use the file that opened up, which could be either one of these if some pawn gets traded at some point. So we need to move the king, and then black just continues by playing pawn to g5. Sometimes during this game, you will see the engine say mistake, miss, inaccuracy. I'm not always going super in-depth. Why? Because these positions are incredibly complex tactically. So even grandmasters struggle in these positions to find the single best move over and over again. This was apparently not the best way to start the attack for black, but okay. And Capablanca is actually in trouble in this game. We are really in trouble because, I mean, everything is pointing towards the king side. Everything is pointing towards the king side. Black will keep pushing these pawns. Something is going to open up, and then, Capablanca is going to lose. And the worst thing that you can do in a position like this would be to start defending. This is a very important thing that I wanted to teach with this video, which is that when you are under attack, The main way to counter that is to just think after every move they make, is this an immediate threat? Are they threatening to win material or to checkmate me on the very next move? And if the answer is no, then you should not defend. And instead you should actually look to counterattack if you can. So what am I talking about? A move that I wouldn't like here would be a move like bishop to e3. This would be an attempt to stop what black is doing, but it's not going to help. And the pawns will just keep rolling up the board. They will force us to open a file, and then the rooks are going to become active and we would lose. We basically just have no time to start reacting to the opponent. Playing g3 would be another one of those, like trying to do something, but by moving the pawn we are creating a target for the attack, and black is going to try to open up the position. So when you find yourself under pressure, the number one thing to do is to think, how can I start a counter attack instead of reacting to what the opponent is doing? So a counter attack would mean that while we want to open up this, we want to remove these pawns, and then we also want to get an attack going, which is why Capablanca played a4, which I think is an incredibly good move at this moment. The engine sees one move which is even better, but I think these moves make sense because we are basically ignoring what's happening, attempting to start or counter attack. That's going to be the only way for white to stay in the game. So black plays pawn to g4, and again we always have to question, is this an immediate threat? Do we need to deal with this? Well, yes. The queen's under attack, and if we don't do anything, we lose the queen. So queen has to move, and I think queen d3 is the only square really that we can go to. The queen only had one square. I think black should have really continued the attack by playing h4 and then eventually pushing one of these pawns. Probably the g pawn as the one that they should push. But black decided to involve the queen, which was actually a major mistake that's going to lead to this game shifting completely from black being winning to white being winning. And when you are attacking, black is attacking here, the main thing to think about is that you want to open up the position, which means remove pawns from the board. It is too early to think about bringing your pieces in. Like, white has enough pieces close to the king that white will be able to defend this with like bishop e3 or rook e2. That's not the point. Like, these three pieces are not going to be enough for black to win. What black needs to do is they need to push pawns and they need to counterattack. Also ignore what's going on here and try to open up the position. But instead they try to activate a piece, and it's just too early. So they attack this f2 pawn, but that's not a problem, as Capablanca now has the time to play bishop to e3. And this is a good move at this very moment. Because first of all, we could not ignore this. We couldn't just take, because this was going to be a checkmate. Check, and then checkmate. A very simple checkmate in two. So we have to react. And only when we have to react, we can play a defensive move, like playing bishop to e3, which is great because we are using a passive piece, trying to trade an attacker for a passive piece. And it also connects the rook so that now both rooks can be active on the queen side. Black decides to take, Capablanca takes. And now the question is really what's remaining here for black? How can they continue the attack? And the answer is that they cannot continue the attack because that queen move really messed up everything. Because now they cannot push the pawns anymore. They even lost one of their bishops. So they don't have an attack left. And being in panic, black decided, okay, let me start reacting to the white attack. Let me start playing more defensively and react to what's going on here. But that's a downward spiral. The moment you start reacting to your opponent's attack, the only outcome that you can get is lose. Or maybe if you got really lucky, secure a draw. But if you start defending, you are never going to win because you are not playing for the win anymore in that position. And being on the defensive always turns out badly. So this capture didn't really help black. I think it even just helped white because now the rook is more active. And the funny thing is that, yes, black is trying to continue their attack, but there's really nothing there anymore. And Capablanca even has time at this moment. Like, we don't need to react, but we could still mess up. We could still mess up. Like if we play a move like pawn g3 reacting to the attack, we would still be losing because now suddenly we have new light squared problems. So really the key lesson from this game that Capablanca played, is that we don't want to react when our opponent is attacking unless if really necessary. Because every time we push one of these pawns near the king, we are going to create new problems. If we push this, things can open up. If we push this, we have weak light squares, and maybe they can play h4 take and then go for a checkmate here. If we play this, position could also open up. So really, we don't want to react. We want to keep going with our own plan. Capablanca decided to play pawn e6. Not a bad plan. And then even play pawn e7. Basically saying, look, I have a passed pawn, which is one square away from promotion. You need to deal with this, because if you don't, this pawn might promote. They are temporarily solving it by blocking it with the rook, but that's not going to really help, as we have a light squared bishop and the promotion square as a light square. So the bishop will be able to attack that square. Capablanca plays bishop to e6, checking the king. I actually expected here for Capablanca to play bishop d7, which he did. And then I was just thinking, okay, this must be a very simple position at this point, since white can, well, literally just take that rook. We are up material, and yeah, black's attack is not going to work. They are down in material. Black has nothing, which this would be a very nice finish to this game. This would literally win the game. But of course, Capablanca wouldn't be Capablanca if he didn't come up with a more brilliant way to finish this game. And except for just trading this and playing the long game, meaning playing out that endgame with superior material, Capablanca realized that actually white also has a great attack going. And this black king, even though that it looks safe, or somewhat safe, it is actually very exposed, and white has a winning sequence here that is just brilliant. Rook takes a6, sacrificing the rook to open up the file by removing the pawn. Black doesn't have to take this, but if they don't, they lose, so black just accepts the rook. Rook to b1 with a check, and the queen and rook and bishop are all working together. This king is really being cornered, and it has no good moves. Going to the corner would literally not help, because there is bishop check, and then eventually there will be a checkmate here. I think check, check, and then eventually queen takes b7 would be checkmate. So king going to the corner here doesn't work. So the only thing black can really do is block. And this next move is genius. Instead of using this bishop to trade for the rook and secure that endgame, Capablanca decided, let's use this bishop for the attack, because now we are attacking this pinned piece twice. It cannot move, and black can also not add any defender, so black can literally do nothing. Black decided, okay, you give me this passed pawn for free, so let me take it, but at this point the game is over. Rook takes b7 with a check, and then the final move is incredibly genius. There's actually only one move here that wins the game for white. So this king, it looks like it's somewhat escaping. It's not in a checkmate yet. This queen is also under attack. So our queen is under attack. But if we save the queen, we won't be winning this game, because black will have the time to avoid getting checkmated. And then black is actually going to have the superior material. So we need to play a move that ignores the threat on our queen. Again, do not defend, do not react to what's happening, and instead puts up a new threat. And Capablanca plays a second brilliant rook move, rook to a7, which is brilliant because it gives away the queen, but afterwards there is a checkmate. And even if they don't take the queen, there is nothing that black can do to prevent this checkmate, basically. So very interesting game. I hope this was really valuable for you.